Greetings, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland. So I'm outside A Milne's house in London on Mallard Street. So this is in a very upscale area called Chelsea. We're just a few outdoors down from where Augustus John lived, and they would have been here at the same time anyway, because he moved here in 1919, A Milne. And although it's on this side of the street, close to where I am, that away, that's where Augustus John lived. Anyway, so A Milne, he was born in an area of London called Kilburn. His father was a headmaster of a small school there, which A Milne later went to. He was brought up a Christian of the Protestant denomination, not especially religious, and indeed A Milne was later quite contemptuous of Christianity. One of his teachers was the celebrated science fiction writer H.G. Wells. He then went to Westminster School, which was one of the most highly regarded schools in the kingdom, still is. He was multi-talented. He was brilliant at mathematics, indeed won a maths scholarship to Cambridge, and went to Trinity, which many regarded as the finest college in Cambridge. And he was also fairly good at cricket, played for a number of amateur cricket teams. So he graduated in maths. He had a brother, Kenneth, who was also quite talented writer too, and they even co-wrote some articles, but his brother's far less well known. Anyway, so he wrote a lot for Granta, which is an undergraduate magazine at Cambridge. He came down to London, and then he contributed pieces to Punch, which was a satirical magazine about current affairs and all sorts of other things. Eventually worked his way up to being assistant editor of that. Those were the days when a budding journalist could actually make a living in London. So times change. Anyway, so he was a man of eclectic literary talents. He didn't just write journalism, reportage, commentary pieces, comedic poems, things like that, all sorts of essays which were meant to be silly, pastiches, parodies of other people's work, expressing views that he didn't agree with, trying to be the most ridiculous style, undermine things he disagreed with. So he had a very fertile mind. But he wrote lots of play scripts, adapted other people's work. Famously, Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. He adapted that for the stage as Toad of Toad Hall, which was a wonderful cartoon thing with David Jason voicing Toad of Toad Hall, something I really adored when I was little. So he was a friend of Kenneth Grahame, and indeed of P.G. Wodehouse, though he later had a terrible falling out with him. We might talk about that a little bit later. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle played cricket with all these guys for the Allah Akbaris, which is a skit on the Muslim incantation Allahu Akbar, as in God is great. But these days, I think you get your bum smacked if you called your cricket team that name. And a writer's 11, as in there are 11 players on a cricket team, in case you didn't know. I mean, I'm violently anti-cricket, but even I happen to know that. So back to A Milne. I don't even know what the AA stood for actually, but he always wrote under that name. So he married, and I think he only had one son, Christopher Robin. So they owned a farm in Sussex, as in due south of London, near the coast, and that became the locale for many of the stories. He drew inspiration from the sylvan surroundings of his idyllic farm, finding a bit of bucolic tranquility out there, away from the traffic's roaring boom, the smog of London, because of course people were getting cars by then, coal fires and factories here, and so it was rather polluted. It's all been almost black, the brickwork back then. Anyway, so he was a good-looking man, quite slim, always well turned out. He was bald by his late 30s though. So the First World War came along. He volunteered for the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, though I don't think he had any particular connection with that Midlands county. And he fought at the Battle of Somme, where he sustained a wound, and he'd fallen quite ill during the war as well. So he spent the last couple of years of the war back in this country, only formally leaving the army in 1919. He'd been made a lieutenant. So back to his writing work, and he wrote a number of grown-up novels. But then when his child was born in 1920, he wrote stories for his boy, Christopher Robin, and then about a bear. Now, some soldiers from Winnipeg in Canada had taken a black bear with them to this country en route to France, and the Canadian soldiers donated it to London. So the Zoological Society of London displayed it, and the bear was nicknamed Winnipeg, so Winnie, after Winnipeg, where the soldiers had come from. Anyway, so then A. Milne wrote a story about Winnie the Pooh, as in, because that was that bear in London Zoo. Although Winnie the Pooh, we know, is a blonde bear after a teddy which his child had, and invented Kanga and Roo and Tigger and all the other ones. You don't want Tigger to lose his bounce in 100-acre wood. So these were the works of his very rich imagination. He could appeal to children. He could write verse for children. And he was very miffed that all his serious work was completely overshadowed by his immensely popular work for children, but that didn't actually make him very wealthy, and some of these books have never been out of print. Anyway, so he wrote a number of other film scripts. I can't think which ones. I mean, I've read the names of them, but none of them are blockbusters. Might have been well known in the 20s or 30s. So he's even in the Home Guard in the First World War, as in the part-time soldiers for men who were too old for military service or just too young, 17 and under. There was sort of a last line of defense in case the Wehrmacht landed here to give them a warm welcome in the event it wasn't needed. So by the 1950s, he was increasingly ill health and spent most of his time in the countryside. I have a feeling he died there in Sussex. I'm not sure where he's buried, but so he has given pleasure to millions. I was delighted by his stories when I was little, and obviously Disney's turned them into a cartoon. Well, that is enough about A. Milne. Toodaloo.